Do you remember what your hands can do? Grab a needle and thread, and let's sew together. Let's practice our backstitching. And for this tutorial, I'm going to be doing the type of backstitch that touches one another, that essentially looks like it's been done with a sewing machine. So to begin, I've already pinned my fabric. So what you're looking at is essentially you'd pin your fabric so that it's right sides together. So I've drawn a line on my fabric as a guideline, and that's something I would really recommend to anyone practicing, because that way you don't have to really think about where is the needle headed. All you have to do is follow that line. So if you're right-handed, you're going to stitch right to left. If you are left-handed, you're going to be stitching left to right. I'm going to start a stitch width away from this edge. I'm going to pick up my fabric and I'm going to take my needle and from the underside, push my needle perpendicular through the fabric, again about a stitch away from the edge of where I want that stitch to start. I'm going to push that needle up again, perpendicular, pulling it till the knot locks in place. And now I'm going to start going truly back. So I'm going to go back to where that stitch is going to begin. I'm going to dip my needle down into the fabric, and then I'm going to progress forward on the other side of that tail. And so this is what your stitch is going to look like. We're not stab stitching. We're going to make sure that this needle is, in essence, parallel to the fabric as we're working, and then parallel to our bodies as we're working. And a trick to making sure your stitches are even is make sure that wherever your tail is in essence bisecting the distance between where your needle is going into the fabric and then where that needle is coming out of the fabric. So I'm going to push this through, of course using my thimble to finally kind of push that needle through. So I've done one stitch, and now I'm going to go back to the stitch that I just did. You can put it through the same hole, you can put it right next to the hole, you may even put it just slightly underneath that hole. I've seen kind of all of those done on historical clothes. I'm going to push this down through the fabric and then gently kind of rock it up. Again, that same distance, that tail is going to bisect the distance between where the needle comes out and where the needle goes in. Pushing it through, picking it up again. Now laying in that other stitch. And we're just going to continue to stitch down the length of this fabric. I want to remind you, as always, to keep your hands nice and relaxed. Make sure that you're sitting up straight. Make sure the work is at your navel height, because either your feet are elevated, they're on a pillow or on the table. And as we're working, we're going to want to make sure that we're pulling this tight enough that it sets the stitch into the fabric. Not so tight that it really gathers it, but if it's too loose, it's not going to set in the seam correctly. The back side looks like this. It's actually a loop going back on itself, and that loop makes this an extremely strong stitch. So I definitely recommend this for like underarm seams, any seam that's going to have stress on it. Your back stitch is definitely going to be your friend. Now I recommend doing about 8 to 10 stitches per inch, because that's going to be nice and strong for the purposes of the back stitch. And honestly, just keep practicing. You want to make sure that your stitches are even. You want to make sure that it's tight enough so that the tension is good, and keeping your hands parallel to the work, the needle parallel to the fabric, and just enjoy the process of really mastering your backstitch. To knot off your stitching line, go as though you are making one more stitch. So put your needle, dip it down to the fabric next to that stitch, but instead of progressing forward, we're just going to push our needle down perpendicular to the other side of the material, pull it through, and then flip over the work. Then I'm going to take a tiny bite out of the fabric and the thread underneath it here. I'm going to take a stitch, and instead of pulling it all the way through, I'm going to keep a loop there, and then I'm going to put my needle through that loop twice. And then I'm going to go ahead and put my needle between the stitches and the fabric, and this is going to be perpendicular through the thread and through the stitching, just to kind of hide the tail, and then you can go ahead and clip that off. And there you have it. a back stitch from the back, and then a nice back stitch from the front. Keep practicing. I look forward to seeing your sewing.